Okay, let's continue. First of all, a shout out to a former Talmud of mine who's learning in Kollel and Gateshead, who sent me a comment on the YouTube video that I posted yesterday, on yesterday's Shia, to Adam, Talmud Chacham. It's nice to know that it's a way of being Marbitz Torah further afield, and I will answer his points as we go through the Shia. Okay, so yesterday we were in the middle of this is where we left off, was on this sheet, and I haven't yet had a chance to attach the bundle to the YouTube video, which I will do later with all the sources. So we were looking at Herschel Grossman's critique of Mark Shapiro's his book, The Limits of Orthodox Theology, and he uncovered an important, possibly the most important nakuda here. When we have academia, the world of academia, critiquing or using its methodological approaches to analyze anything really, but certainly machloikus on matters which are so central and fundamental and important to our emunah, they do so in the same way that they would any other investigation, whether it's geography or any part of history, etc., etc. And that is a problem for us. Not because chas v'shalom, not because we just accept everything with blind faith. Of course, we more than anybody anything else critique and learn everything clearly and deeply. But we saw yesterday I have no other way to describe it, but an astonishing arrogance in the way that Mark Shapiro, for example, takes psukim, the very same psukim, which the Rambam, and the Rambam is not on his own, as we have demonstrated doesn't mean everybody agreed. The Raavad said no. Gedolim v'toivim, whether they were mimenu, whether they weren't mimenu, disagreed, beseda. But just to think that one has the same, to start from a tabula rasa, a blank page, and there's a posuk. The Rambam says this. I think Pshat in the posuk is like this. That is not something that we accept at all, and that in itself runs contrary to our approach to Torah. The Rambam's words are taken with tremendous reverence, and just to posit, just simply to put it out there like that. Well, the Rambam says this, and I think that's in the same posuk that's the pshat, and therefore it's misleading. Kilei re'isem kol tmuna. It means there is a tmuna, but you didn't see it. To us, it's actually farcical, in the sense that, in the same way that if I were to take a sugya and fundamentally disagree with Moshe Feinstein without recourse to other sources, there is a weighting, there is peer review, and there is a concept of authority where Gedolim and Poskim through the generations, especially take for example the self. I mean, just occurred to me now, but maybe this is a simple way of explaining it. The Gemara is based, as you know, there are a number of built-in assumptions in the Gemara. One of the most common, and one which people, when I introduce them to Gemara, they find complicated, is the Gemara will ask a question on Shmuel or Abaya and Rava from a Brisa, from a Mishnah. Why is that a question? What's the problem? Abaya was a very great scholar. He lived 100, 150 years after whoever it was, Rebbe Kiva, whatever. But it is considered to be a refutation. The very notion. There is a concept of the closing off of a doira. It was self-imposed. Nobody came along and said, oh, you can't argue with a Mishnah because I say so, otherwise there'll be consequences. No. It was their own humility, it was their own recognition that a door was closed off. And Abaya himself, it was self-imposed. They realized that they could not argue with Rabbi Yehuda, with Rabbi Yossi, with Rabbi Shimon. They realized that. And therefore it was taken as a refutation. Unless, of course, you can find support from another Brisa. Katanoi, fine, Beseda. Where is that in Mark Shapiro's approach? The Rambam, whose words are held in such reverence. He established himself, not that we need to go to the Goyim, Chas v'Shalom, to Hashem mipivanu chayim. And this is what the Ramban writes there's echoes of this in the Ramban's letter that we studied to the Chachmei Tzarfas, to Rabbi Chilmi Paris. Where is your... you've taken something, first of all, maybe hearsay, but where is your Yiras HaKavod? The Ramban takes the Balitosus to task, his contemporaries, and one of the strands and the thrusts of his argument we saw very clearly was, how could you not take into account how great the Rambam was in every level, his humility, his Torah, his Chasidus, his everything, and you just to blithely dismiss him because you don't think that you agree with him and create a worldwide excommunication and a ban and a geniza v'sfarim. Where's your Yiras HaKavod? That's one of his thrusts. And this is the same thing we have to ask. Kal v'chomer bel b'noi shel kal v'chomer. That was the Ramban against the Balei Tosfos, his contemporaries. Mark Shapiro against the Rambam? Really? Really? Just blithely, just like that? It's that approach which, the Rishonim and Achronim, same thing. Who decided? And there are exceptions. Rav Tanahu Upaleg. Yes, there is such a thing. There's an Igeres from the Chazon Ish, a Rechaim Simon Yud Gimel. Happen to remember it. Apologies. Sorry. There's an Igeres from the Chazon Ish. He's talking about a certain thing in Hilchos Krishma, and he writes, Umilonu godel me Rabbeinu Hagra, asher niten lo reshus min hashamayim lachlik al harishonim. Chazon Ish wrote it, okay. There are exceptions. There are stars in the firmament that were beyond their time, but that again was acknowledged internally by those who know what they're talking about. Not a professor, a historian. Right? It is sad. It's sad. I think that's the real word. It's sad. And that is the Yesod HaDavar. And that's before we will get into, and we are going to get into the substance of that. But that is what lies at the heart of the problem. It's the same thing, Lahavdil, which we saw, remember the Ramban against Aristo. The problem with Yavon was the gaiva, the arrogance. Empiricism. Only if I can observe it and haul it into my lab and quantify it, then it exists. And if not, it is not said to exist. It's the same. I'm going on about this because I think it's important to realize this. This is the Nakuda. Okay. Having said that, and again, I do not know Mark Shapiro. I haven't nothing against him at all. He's a wonderful historian, but when it comes to Torah and critiquing the opinion and the approach, it is. I think it is right for us to do so, and important for us to do so, and to understand the way that we should approach it. So, where we were up to, we were. I'm losing my own place here. Yes, Rashi was a corporealist, and this brings into the whole the Slifkin contretemps, the whole of the Slifkin affair, as it was known. There were shades also of the same thing. The same thing. You have to know your place. It doesn't mean that there's plenty of room, and this is it's not the shir for now, but Torah is the prism through which your uniqueness is able to shine through. It turns from being Torah Hashem to Torah Soy. There is Shivim Panim La Torah, and every person has their own, but it's not a free-for-all. And it is only within the self-imposed, understood constraints of what is and isn't authentic Torah, that a person can be innovative, and we've had so many Gedolim and who fiercely disagree with each other. No question about that. But again, there is, of course, a pecking order. There is a weighting, as indeed there is in any other discipline with peer review, etc. Point has been made. Weiter. We were actually just the last paragraph before we get to Rashi was a corporealist. Are you with me? Yeah? The last paragraph. Shapiro follows the same approach to Talmudic sources. He seeks to prove that according to the Talmud, God is corporeal from the passages which say that God wears tefillin, Hillel compares his countenance to the image of God, and from numerous Talmudic discussions regarding Tzelem Elokim. The meaning of these passages has been explained and taught since Gaonic times as allegorical, without the slightest suggestion that these passages might refer to God as corporeal. To Shapiro, however, they are a discovery which challenges the Rambam's third principle. Are there no limits to academic hubris? Hubris is the fancy word for arrogance. And again, I mean, let's be fair. To say that there were no disagreements, there were. We saw the Ibn Ezra, who says that there were Chachomim, those who the Ibn Ezra called Chachomim, understood the Gemara in Brachos about Hashem wearing tefillin, seemingly kipshutai. There were some, but to say that but it's certainly not the majority opinion, and it certainly wasn't the standard opinion. It certainly wasn't the opinion of the Goinim. It certainly wasn't the opinion of the Ramban. It wasn't the opinion of the Rambam. It wasn't the opinion of the vast majority. Vast majority. And then just to use them and say, well, that challenges the Rambam's principle is nothing other than arrogance. Okay, now let's get to Rashi. And here, this is interesting, although I want to rush through this a bit, because what I want to spend some time on for the next 1 or 2 sessions is an incredible article by Rav Lopiansky, which we'll come to soon. So, like I mentioned yesterday, Rav Slifkin wrote an article in Hakira potentially suggesting that Rashi was a corporealist, to which there was a response by this guy Sol Zucker, and he responded back, and it went backwards and forwards, and I'll upload the whole thing. He's going to deal with this now a little bit, but in reference to Shapiro. Let's have a look. According to Shapiro, there is a reason to believe that Rashi, as well, was a corporealist. He bases his claim on Rashi's comments to Shmos 7:5 and 14:31, where it says Yod HaChazaka. Rashi says Yad Mamash. That's the Rashi. Okay? Very interesting. So you have a Yod Chazaka, and Rashi, let's get out the Chumash, let's get out the Rashi, let's do it inside, never rely on anything second-hand. It is, I think, hold on a second, 7:5 and 14:31. Let's have a look. Zayin Nochamal. So it's one of them is in this week's parasha, Perek Zayin Posuk Vav, Posuk Hey, sorry. It says as follows. Steht in Posuk. V'yodu Mitzrayim ki ani Adonai ben toisi es yodi al Mitzrayim v'hitzeisi es b'nei Yisrael mitocham. So that Mitzrayim will know that I am Hashem when I stretch out my hand. Says Rashi. Zokt Rashi. Where's it gone? Sorry. Es yodi yad mamash lehakois bohem. Says Rashi. You know, let's try and work it out on our own. First of all, let's learn a Rashi. Sorry?
You could put also comma after yad. Yad, comma, mamash lehakois.
I think that's a bit contrived. I hear what you're saying, but I think that would be a bit contrived. I don't think that's... I think you laughed when you suggested it. Yeah,
it's right.
Yeah, we don't need to. Okay, so let's do it. Let's do it. As Yodi says, Rashi, Yad Mamash lehakois bohem. So it wasn't enough, by the way, just for Rashi to say Yad Mamash. He didn't stop there. He added something, lehakois bohem. Literally my hand to hit them. The first thing I would ask myself is, I need to know what Rashi means, Yad Mamash. Okay, that's interesting. What on earth does he mean? But then why was it not enough to say that Yad Mamash? Because potentially there's another Yad of some sort, but not a Yad Mamash. So Rashi has to clarify, when it says in this passage Yad Yodi, it means Yad Mamash. Lehakois bohem. Why did he have to add to hit them? That's just a first thought that would pop into my head. And then let's have a look one more place, which is Yud Daled Lamed Aleph, that's in Beshalach, and dort steht, Vayar Yisrael es hayod hagdoilo, ashos Hashem b'Mitzrayim. Vayirom es Hashem, vayaminu b'Hashem of Moshe Avdoi. Zokt Rashi, es hayod hagdoilo, es hagvura hagdoilo, she'oseso yodoi, shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The great power that the hand of Hashem had wrought, had done. V'harbe l'shonos noiflin al loshon yad. There are many expressions which apply to the term yad. V'chulon loshon yad mamash heim. And all of them are expressions of yad mamash. V'hamafarshoi yisakein haloshon achar inyan hadibur. And therefore, somebody who comes to explain it needs to understand, because there are many lashonos noiflin al loshon yad, many different lashonos that can be associated with yad. So you need to know from the context, you're to be masakin the loshon achar inyan adibur based on the context. But the kulon loshon yad mamish. So vayar Hashem es hayod hagdoilo ashos Hashem b'Mitzrayim. We have two Rashis where Rashi is referring to the same thing, which is HaKadosh Baruch Hu smiting and punishing the Mitzrayim, and thus demonstrating his gevura, yod hagdoilo. And it's in both of them Rashi has said yad mamish. Says Shapiro, you see, it's yad mamish, it's Hashem's physical hand. Shapiro claims, go on.
We'll reveal it.
Let's see it. Shapiro claims that Rashi's comment is to prevent one from thinking that in this verse, hand means simply power. He therefore says that it means a hand literally, indicating that Rashi believed in the corporeality of God. And you have the quote here, limits, that's in his book, page 57. Let's just stop there a second. So, let's do this ourselves. Don't read further. Let's do this ourselves. If I were, or if you were to sit down with a Rashi, Parshas Va'era and Parshas Beshalach, and you read and you learn this Rashi, what do you do?
I don't understand Rashi.
You don't understand Rashi?
Look up the classic version of Rashi.
Oh, shkayach. You would open up a Sifsei Chachamim, a Gur Aryeh, a Ramban, a Mizrahi, a Tzioni, a Levush Ha'ira, and you'd start looking. Klal Yisrael has got plenty. There's plenty of Mefarshim on Rashi. Ramban comments on Rashi. Rishonim comment. There are plenty just to understand Rashi. What you don't do, what makes zero sense, the way I was mechunach and the way I think is the right way, is just to stop there and to take an idea which goes counter to the accepted understanding in Emunah and say, wow, you see from here, Rashi must have held that Hashem has a physical hand. And create a massive, because this has huge implications, obviously. According to the Rambam, you're a kafir, it's heresy, you're a min. The Ravid agrees, he just says there were Gedolim who maybe also potentially made a mistake, but it is a mistake. But just to read the Rashi, again, I'm doing this because I'm highlighting the approach. This is important for us to realize. We can refute him shortly, but it's more, to me, and I think sort of teaching you, this is the thing I want you to remember. This is the bit to remember. We have Baruch Hashem a big Torah, and Rashi was held in such high regard as the Rosh Hamafarshim that Gedolim and Rishonim and Gedolei Achronim wrote Svarim. So the first thing I would do is, I know I've been brought up from Kindweis, I know that Hashem doesn't have a physical hand. That's the standard, Pashtus. And then I see Rashi says Yad Mamish. What do? Like you say, quite rightly. You look, Ramban, Gur Aryeh, and you start learning. But to then just write a book and then say, well, you see, Rashi was a corporealist, that's not the approach that I would take. That's so far the methodological critique. Now let's have a look. And we'll get later also, hopefully, to Rabbi Lopiansky. He's also going to comment on this as well. But let's see. So Grossman says this is a simple misreading. On the contrary, Rashi indicates that hand does mean power, as he explains explicitly in his commentary in 1431. What does he say? He says, Es hayad hagdoila. Let's reread that Rashi. Es hayad hagdoila, es hagvura hagdoila. She'asa sayada shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. He starts off by saying, Es hayad hagdoila. They saw the Yod HaGdolah. What does that mean? Says Rashi. Doesn't mean they saw his hand, his Yod HaGdolah. It means Es HaGvura HaGdolah. That's what they saw. So when it says Yod HaGdolah, it is metaphorical. It is figurative, if you like. But it was brought about, the medium through which they experienced Es HaGvura. Rashi explains. Es HaYod HaGdolah means Es HaGvura HaGdolah. But it's Gvura HaGedolah she'asa sayadai shel HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So it means Gvura. Yod HaGedolah means Gvura, which came about through a Yad. So let's see. So this is a simple misreading. On the contrary, Rashi indicates that hand does mean power, as he states explicitly. When Rashi writes mamash, he means to preclude the alternative meaning of Yad, which is domain. We find many times that in halacha, the kinyan of Yad, Yodai Shel Adam, there's of kinyan of Yad. So it doesn't mean the domain, it means the power exhibited by Yad. More revealing than the fact that Shapiro has misread Rashi is the fact that he has ignored the comments of Gur Aryeh, Mizrahi, and Ramban, who all explain Rashi quite clearly. Shapiro also neglects to cite Rashi to Shmos 15:8, where Rashi states clearly that all mentions of God's traits or emotions are metaphorical. Let's look at that Rashi. 15:8. In Oz Yoshev, Zokt Rashi. So to then ignore Mizrahi, Gur Aryeh, and Ramban, and then just to, on the basis of that, to draw a sweeping conclusion with far-reaching consequences from a Rashi that's the problem, really, more than anything else, and that's really all we need to take out of it. Although we will we let's go a little bit further. Says Lashon of Rashi. Oh, it's a long one. Says Rashi, "Uveruach apecha ne'er mumayim," with the breath that emanated, the air, the breath that emanated from his nostrils, the waters were shaken up. Hayotze mishnei nechiraim shalaf, diber hakosuv ki biyochel b'shchina, dugmas melech basav adam, kedei lahashmiya oizen habrios kefi hahoive, sheyuchlu lahavin adovar, keshadam koyes yotze ruach min nechirov. When a person gets all thing, smoke, in the cartoons, smoke comes out of his nostrils, right? V'chein ola oshen ba'apoi, v'chein meruach apoi, v'zeu she'omar leman shmi erich apoi k'shazavoi, ukishu koyes, etc. Very clearly. Kach nira be'enai, v'chol af v'chorin shebemikra ani oi mekein, shanichirayim, etc. K'moi rotzoin. Fine. Very clear. So, he has what's he going to say? He has a physical hand, but he doesn't have a nose. Where's the logic there? Okay, that's even before you go any further. Fine. Shapiro cites an additional proof that Rashi believes in corporeality from the latter's commentary to Yevamos, where the sages say that all prophets look through an unclear lens, as Paklaria She'ina Me'ira, while Moshe Rabbeinu looked through a clear lens. An examination of the original text shows that this is a gross misreading. The Talmud there recalls that Menashe HaMelech accused Yeshaya of asserting that he saw Hashem's image, because Yeshaya said, Ra'isi, I saw Hashem sitting on his throne, whereas the Torah says, Ki lo ra'isa kol tmuna. This is what Menashe accused Yeshaya of. The Gemara explains Yeshaya's words, saying that his vision was through an unclear lens, and therefore he imagined he was seeing Hashem's image, while Moshe Rabbeinu prophesied through a clear lens and made no such error. In other words, Moshe Rabbeinu had complete clarity of vision and realized that God had no form, Yeshaya did not. The Talmud and Rashi's commentary make this the only possible interpretation of the passage. Shapiro's conclusion that it indicates corporeality is thus unwarranted. To bolster his claim that the Torah and Talmud accept corporeality of God, And here, this is also very telling. Yeah, we're on page 58. Shapiro cites an array of academics who take this position. For example, he quotes Alon Goshen Gottstein, the founder of the Elijah Interfaith Institute. Look at the note down here. Whose training seminars are described as a place where expert teachers and lecturers from different religious traditions share ideas, encounter sacred texts, practice the spiritual life, and experience bibliodrama. And this is an academic whose understanding of Torah is put on a par with Lahavdil Elef Havdalis, the Rambam, Afro Lepumayhu. And this academic, so to bolster his position that the Torah and the Talmud accept corporeality, you bring in another academic. You've got the Rambam and you've got Alon Goshen Gottstein, the Elijah Interfaith Institute, who makes the bold assertion that there is absolutely no objection in all of rabbinic literature to the idea that man was created in the image of God's physical form, and in all of rabbinic literature there's not a single statement that categorically denies that God has no body, has body or form. And this is something that Shapiro is quoting to bolster his thing. This, in our world, is just, it's unacceptable. It is just utterly unacceptable.
And it was published in Harvard Theological Review.
And it was published in the fact, okay, of course, yes, published the body as image of God in rabbinic literature. This is classic. You know, I do dabble into that world. I have a subscription to academia, which I pay 80 or 90 euros a year for, and JSTOR, and I also I do want to know what's going on, but Rabbeinu de Kol Alma, that this should be given any sort of credence. An interfaith institute is this is not Torah as we know it. This is the problem.
It's also not real academia. It's a shame for Harvard to publish it.
Whatever. Yeah.
No.
So this is it. So this is it when you.
It's just false.
So this is what we are dealing with. Okay. And although it doesn't really need to be said, but the Rambam, however, says differently. The Rambam writes, it's explicit in the Torah and the prophets, and God has no body or corpus, etc. So Shapiro ignores Rambam's own citation of numerous rabbinic sources that God has no body, and prefers instead to give credence to unfounded claims by academics that there is no rabbinic support for the Rambam's principle. So this is part of his critique. In another proof that there are sources for belief in God's corporeality, Shapiro writes, Rabbi Yisrael Lipschitz in Tiferes Yisrael writes that Moshe, unlike the other prophets, saw, as it were, God's reflection in his aspeclaria. Obviously, there must be substance to cause a reflection. That is a proof he brings from Tiferes Yisrael. That the Tiferes Yisrael writes that because Moshe Rabbeinu saw Hashem ba'aspeclaria, which is a speculum, which is a mirror, so that means there must have been something to see a reflection. So you see, the Tiferes Yisrael held corporeality. This conclusion is without basis. In this passage, Tiferes Yisrael is explaining the commentary of Rambam to the Mishnah in Kalim, where a utensil called an aspeclaria is mentioned. He understands Rambam's commentary there to be referring to a mirror and not to a lens, as others have it. He applies this translation to the passage in the Sages mentioned above, that prophets had a vision of Hashem through an aspeclaria or lens. He says this word means a reflection as of a mirror. It is clear from Tiferes Yisrael that the use of aspeclaria in this context is allegorical. Indeed, Tiferes Yisrael refers to seeing prophecy through a mirror as kaviyochel. He uses the word kaviyochel, an expression used to indicate that an expression is not to be meant literally. This would be true whether the translation of the word is lens or mirror. Reb Lipschitz's translation has no bearing whatsoever on God's corporeality. If there is any doubt about this, Tiferes Yisrael writes in the same paragraph, it is impossible for a mortal to see the essence of God, even for Moshe Rabbeinu, regarding whom it is written, and my countenance will not be seen. It is only that all of Israel saw only a reflection of his essence, whereas Moshe Rabbeinu, as it were, saw the reflection as clearly as it is possible to see it. So the notion then, therefore, that the Tiferes Yisrael holds corporeality just doesn't add up at all. Let's just finish this off because I want to get started on the next article. Shapiro cites Rambam as clearly holding the opinion that angels are forms without body. He therefore questions elsewhere, when Hilchas Avodah Zarah, Rambam rules that one may not make images of angels. He argues that since one cannot make a graven image of something which has no body, the prohibition proves that Rambam is of the opinion angels have bodies. Says Shapiro, this is an example of Maimonides recording a law even though it did not fit in with his worldview. Very, very bold statement to make. It's an example. In other words, he is suggesting that the Rambam paskens in Yad something on the basis of a hashkafa that he held was apikorsus. I mean, the glaring contradiction that would make, because, and even before we go any further, as we have pointed out much earlier in this series, many times, we do not separate the world of hashkafa and halacha, because holding the wrong view, L'das Rambam, has very direct halachic implications. Shchita, being counted a minyan. It's not just an idea that he held in the abstract at a theoretical, philosophical level, which you could then categorize and file under one drawer, but when it comes to Hilchos Avodah Zarah, you can paskin something else. They're one and the same. It makes zero sense. But all of this has no basis. Angels may have no physical form, but still one is forbidden to make a graven image which one declares is an image of the angel. Just as one is forbidden to make a graven image of God, even though God has no form or body. It's so, the refutation here is so elementary, it's so primary school. It's a schoolboy error. I'm sorry to say this, it's a schoolboy error. It's so simple. Are you allowed? Is there an issa min haTorah to take some metal and pottery and create an image and say, Eli ato, ze Eli, it's an issa d'oraisa? Does that therefore prove, because there's an issa d'oraisa, that Hashem has an image or body? Because otherwise it would be no issa? Absolutely not. And he's just done the same thing to the Rambam in thing. So this is sadly a case of shooting the arrow and drawing the target around it. To some extent, certainly. There's no other way to do it. And then we come to Rav Moshe Tako, and this is where it heats up a little bit. So, Shapiro cites a work entitled Ksav Tamim, written by Rav Moshe Tako in the 13th century, as rejecting Rambam's third principle and understanding God as having an image, quote, as having an image and form, or at least to assume these at will. That's the English way of saying he could, if he wanted to, he could take on human form. Okay? At least one eminent scholar has shown without doubt that Tako never said this. Even if the work was written by Rav Moshe Tako, and there's ample reason to suspect it wasn't, there is not one source within this work where he writes God is corporeal. Here too is a conclusion which examination of the original source would have shown to be wrong. And this is only part of a much wider article. Shapiro did respond, and Grossman wrote back, and I'll include it in the bundle. We're not going to spend time on it. What we now are going to do is, we're going to move on to a masterly article by Reb Aaron Lopiansky. Some of it's going to be a bit heavy going, but...
Is it in here?
Yes, I gave it to you. Yes.
The answer of Shapiro.
No, I will. But I'll attach it to the eventually to the when I get round to it. Look, I say I've got a whole. I've got all of this. We can't do everything. Now, Reb Aaron Lopiansky, Rosh Yeshiva in Greater Washington, a author of numerous Sfarim, a veteran mechanech, and a superb Talmud Chacham. I'll let the article speak for itself. He's been here, that's where Aaron Hecker's yeshiva, where he's in yeshiva there. So a very a man with gadlus. He's a great man. Okay, so he wrote an article in 2013. Remember the article written by Slifkin in Shapiro, if I'm not mistaken, was 2009, I think it was. And maybe I got that wrong. I'd have to check. We saw that. Either way, so he chose to write an article in a journal called Dialogue, and the article is called The Corporeality Which Never Was. This is 2013. This article should never have been published, he starts out. It deals with a topic that should not be discussed in an English language journal. Rather, the article requires dedicated reading by sophisticated scholars, fluent in Hebrew, and due to the sensitivity of the topic should be approached with trepidation. Yet an incident occurred that compelled me to write this article, my personal limitations and the venue's unsuitability notwithstanding. Not long ago, in the course of a casual conversation, someone mentioned to me that whether God has a body or not is a machlekes rishonim between the Rambam and Rav Moshe Tako. The assertion was made with the same confidence and ease that one might have mentioned the machlokes of Rashi and Rabbeinu Tam regarding the order of Pashis in Tefillin. I was taken aback by my interlocutor's certainty and responded, do you realize the implications of what you are saying? And have you actually seen Rav Moshe Taku's opinions in its source? I have since then heard similar comments, and therefore I felt it imperative that the record be set straight. In short, there is no evidence that the notion of God's corporeality is indeed Rav Moshe Taku's thesis, as we shall show. And this...
Can I ask just
yes.
besides that, because I had never heard about Rav Moshe Taku. Is he?
We're going to see who he is.
Known name?
We're going to go into part of that. We will delve into part of that. I personally, as a card-carrying Amoritz, had not heard of him either before I went into...
That's good enough.
That
means it's really not.
I don't mind. Beseder, bavakasha. Why, the rash or the cold?
Both.
Both. Okay, bavakasha. So let's have a look. We have a few minutes. Let's at least make a start on it, and hopefully we'll finish it tomorrow. The Rambam in his commentary on Mishnayos and his Mishnah Torah lists God's incorporeality as the third fundamental of the faith, and this view is the unanimously espoused position of all recorded Torah authorities. You've got Reb Sadiq also. Okay. On the face of it, there are very powerful reasons for rejecting the belief in corporeality as untenable. On the other hand, on Rambam's statement that belief in corporeality is blasphemous, Ravad disagrees in an astonishing gloss, stating that there are greater and better people, brackets, than Rambam, who held that position. We've seen this, okay? This comment by the Ravad has confounded generations of students who have never found those greater and better authorities who took that position. In truth, they even found it difficult to identify any grouping of people who could be considered greater and better than the Rambam. Even those who did not believe in corporeality, and I was glad to see that down here, note 6, he quotes the Chazon Ish that we have learnt, that Mimenu does not mean greater than the Rambam, but greater than us, or from amongst us. And I showed you from in previous Shurim that there are at least 2 kisvei yad where that word Mimenu in the Rambam is not there. Okay, either way. Be that as it may, it seems that we apparently have, according to the Ravad, record of a group of rabbis who believe that God is a corporal entity. There is a second source of the idea that there are those who believe in the corporeality, the polemic against the Rambam's detractors, namely Rabbeinu Yonah, Reb Shlomo ben Avram, as we've discussed, and Reb David ben Shol. The Rambam's son, Reb Avram, wrote his Milchemes Hashem to attack them, and the Ramban wrote letters defending the Rambam against these detractors, which we have studied at length. It would appear from these writings that the opponents of the Rambam seem to believe in a corporeal deity. The problem with deriving such a thesis from these polemics is that they merely repeat hearsay evidence, but no actual citations of the views held by the Rambam's opponents. Nowhere do we see a Rabbeinu Yonah, a Reb Shlomo ben Ahar, or any of the others in their writings. We don't see that. It is literally impossible to reconstruct any position actually held by the detractors of the Rambam. The seemingly most explicit proponent of corporeality is in the work Ksav Tomim by Rav Moshe Taku. Before examining what he actually said, it would be profitable to know who Rav Moshe Taku was. That's why I said we'll come to it, yeah? And the nature of the work Ksav Tomim. Now, let's see. This is fascinating. He's done his homework. This has really impressed me. He is so professional. He does things properly. You'll see. I was blown away by... This is a Rosh Hashiva in the classic Litvischer mold, who, as you'll see later from some of the footnotes, that the academic research that he's done is quite astounding. Not that is his gadlus, but it shows that he did it and he did it properly. There is a clear record of a Rav Moshe ben Chazdai of Taku living in various places in Eastern Europe and in Eretz Yisrael. We can also definitively date him as having lived before 1234, for he is quoted in Arugas HaBoisam, a classic work on Piyutim by Rabbi Avram ben Azriel, where he is mentioned as deceased. Since Arugas HaBoisam was published in 1234, we can conclude that he lived before that date. The Ramban refers to him as having lived in and having come from Poland, and as having been alive at the time of the writing of Chidushei HaRamban. The Ramban quotes him in Gittin Zayin Omid Beis. So So he's come. So blah, blah, blah. The Ramban refers to him as having lived in and having come from Poland. The Urzarua, the Modcha, Marami Rottenberg, Migdal Oiz, and Mahri Brunner quote him as well in various halachic contexts. So that answers your first point, I think, Eli. Yeah, that he isn't a nobody in the sense that he is quoted by these Gedolei Harishonim. We also know that Rav Moshe Tako wrote a work called Ksav Tomim. It is cited in Arugas HaBoisem and by the Ramah in Torah Sa'olah. I don't know if you ever had a chance to learn Torah Sa'olah. I've never got around to it. I dip into it every now and again. The Ramah wrote a sefer, which is much more philosophical, mainly about korbanos, but includes many, many incredible ideas. So he is mentioned by. So we've established his bona fides, and the Ramah, and this Sefer, Ksav Tomim, is quoted by the Ramah. Fine. There is, however, no mention in any of these works of controversial positions held by Rav Moshe Tako. No mention of it. Okay. In the 1800s, a researcher of the Hebrew manuscripts, Eliakim Karmoli, found an unidentified manuscript consisting of about 54 pages in the French National Library. The beginning and the end of the manuscript were missing, and there was no clue as to how much was missing. The manuscripts had misordered pages, and one or two pages within it were missing. Karmoli, by a flash of inspiration, matched two passages cited in Arugas HaBoisem to the two passages in the manuscript, and also matched an attribution error in the manuscript to the same error cited by the Ramah in Torah Sa'olah as coming from Ksav Tomim. Karmoli therefore determined that the manuscript was Rav Moshe Taku's Ksav Tom. Okay, so far so good. In 1860, Raphael Kirschheim published the manuscript in a collection called Oitze Nechmad. In 1984, Professor Yosef Dan published a photocopy of the manuscript with a 20-page foreword. To date, these publications are all we have of Rav Moshe Taku's work. A casual browsing through the manuscript, and especially through his vigorous attack on the Rambam, will certainly leave the impression that Rav Moshe Taku disagrees with the principle of incorporeality which the Rambam et al. Formulated. A careful reading, however, provides a very different understanding of this position. Before discussing the content of the manuscript, and this was very impressed me in the research that he's done, his homework, we must note that an objective scholar will be left with quite a bit of discomfort about the authenticity of the manuscript for the following reasons. Number one, Karmoli had a sordid reputation for forgeries. And here, look in note 18, there is proper sources for this. Okay? He had a reputation for forgeries. And the fact that he was the discoverer of this manuscript does not inspire us with great confidence as to its authenticity. As much as I could determine, the manuscript seems to have existed before Karmoli's time. And he writes here in note 19, the French National Library supplied me with the following information. The manuscript once belonged to Cardinal Mazarin, who served as the chief minister of France 1642 until his death in 1661. Therefore, this manuscript arrived in France after 1642. It then passed to Jean-Baptiste Colbert's collection before becoming part of the Library of the King of France. The cover is made of red leather, blah, blah, blah. Okay, interesting. So it seems to have existed before Karmoli's time. Karmoli was, according to various biographical sketches, either the librarian of the Hebrew division in the French National Library, or the library was his workplace. So with the cat guarding the cream, it would not have been too difficult for him to have discovered, quotation marks, a sensational manuscript. Brackets, look at number 20, he was later fired from the rabbinate of Brussels for reformist tendencies. This is who we're dealing with. Moreover, he had been accused of adding to existing manuscripts and or changing their titles. See Meir Ish Shalom, Midrash Eser Galuyos, concerning something published by Karmoli. Right. This evidence suggests that the original manuscript might have been genuine, but that Karmoli might have tampered with it. In other words, somebody who has reputation for forgeries, and he is the one, you always have to have the chain of evidence. He's the one that is in charge, and we know has a reputation for forgeries. It is okay to question its authenticity, maybe. Number two, none of the controversial statements in the manuscript regarding corporeality are referred to in any other works. So, Rav Moshe Taku is known and quoted by Gedolei Rishonim. Nowhere do we find any reference. So they were familiar with him and his writings and his psukim, and were prepared to quote him Zorua to the Ramban, etc. But nowhere is there the slightest whisper of these incredibly controversial views that he held. Sorry, question mark. Notice, very interesting, he writes down here, 22. The Maharshal, in his second introduction to Yam Shel Shlomo, quotes Rav Moshe Taku as someone who writes against the philosophers. He then proceeds to quote a lengthy excerpt from Rav Moshe Taku, which is not in our version of Ksav Tomim, or on any topic relevant to it. In the editions of the Yam Shel Shlomo, I have seen there are two matters which make it unclear that the Maharshal is indeed referring to Ksav Tomim. Number one, in referring to Rav Moshe Taku, he uses the words Kosav Tomid, which is either a typo, and it should read Ksav Tomim, or it means he wrote constantly, he was prolific output, and does not refer to his Ksav Tomim at all. In addition, he writes that Rav Moshe Taku wrote a Riok Tana, which he proceeds to quote. Does that mean an addendum, referring to a chapter in Ksav Tomim, or another work? It's unclear. Okay, either way. So point number 2 is, nowhere do we see any reference by any contemporary or anybody quoting this incredibly, if you indeed held this view, it's not mentioned anywhere. Number 2. Number 3, the length of the manuscript and the ferocity of its language have no equivalent in its time and age. Fascinating. Number 4, Rav Moshe Taku's attack on Rambam, Reb Sadigon, Ibn Ezra and others is quite fierce. Yet this attack is never mentioned by any of his contemporaries, nor is there any polemic directed against him. It is a silence which is deafening. Contrast this with Rabbeinu Yoina et al., whose disputes with the Rambam are recorded many times in history. Was Rav Moshe Taku's attack ignored because he was unimportant, or because he was highly respected as a halachist, but not as a worthy antagonist in theological matters? Or perhaps the silence indicates that we are mistaken in understanding his words. More pertinently, perhaps it indicates that the passage in question is bogus. Professor Yosef Dan in his foreword is troubled by the silence, and he suggests his contemporaries didn't wish to make an issue with him. He doesn't like that. Conspiracy theories are almost always fictional. The contemporaries of Rav Moshe Taku were fiercely argumentative, and at least one of them should have expressed some sentiment, says Rav Lopiansky, which is very reasonable. So it's okay to cast a shadow of doubt on it. Number 5, the manuscript itself, as stated, is in some disarray, and Kirschheim reshuffled some pages. Professor Dan points out this fact, implying that, in his opinion, the manuscript should have been left as it had been. However, it appears more likely that Kirschheim's arrangement of the misordered pages is correct. While the aforementioned points are troubling, they are not the real issue. And this we will have to stop here for today, but he's already began to cast some doubts on the authenticity, potentially, of the document. But even if we were to accept the document as to being true, tomorrow we will go into the meat of what it is and see how Rav Lopiansky deals with it. And as an addendum, he's also going to talk about the Rashi and the Rashis that we learned a little bit earlier today and give his take on it.